Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Elevate the Library, Improving Library Value and Increasing Institutional Impact, which is sponsored by ProQuest Ex Libris, part of Clarivate. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest of the academic library community. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of our webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our presenters. We do expect many questions and we likely will not have time to get to them all, so we apologize in advance for that. But that being said, we'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. Also note there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I'll pass it over to our moderator for today, Jessie Ransom.
Great, thank you so much. I'll say again, thank you to all of you for joining us today for our discussion on improving library value and increasing the institutional impact. We have a great panel today featuring 4 librarians from Rutgers University representing different parts of the library. So I'll let them introduce themselves in a few minutes. But in the meantime, I'm Jessie Ransom. I'm the Teaching and Learning Product Specialist for Ex Libris, and I'll be your moderator today. We'll start with a brief introduction. I'll provide a little bit of context around Ex Libris, which should help frame the panel discussion. And then from there, we'll dive into what's going on at Rutgers. If you have any questions, as Sabrina said, put those in the Q&A. We'll save time at the end for as many of the questions as we can get to. So first of all, this is certainly not news to any of us. We are still dealing with the pandemic. I think we can anticipate that we'll be dealing with the longer term impact of the pandemic for a long time. I think it's probably safe to say that we will never go back to quite the world that we were in before, no matter how badly we may want to. But when we think about what this really means, this is the question that libraries around the world are really thinking about right now. Not only are we in this position where we're sort of adjusting to this new normal, but we also need to think about what comes next. We need to do that amid budget cuts, sometimes very significant budget cuts, and also with the need to accommodate changes in user expectations, especially as many libraries temporarily shifted their services in response to COVID and now need to think about what's sustainable, what's relevant, what's useful or impactful moving forward. And as always, libraries are looking for opportunities to add value to their users and ways to demonstrate the impact of their collections and services across the institution. So within or during the session today, our panelists from Rutgers will discuss the challenges that their users are facing, the services that the library provides to support their users, and also some of the things that they're considering for the future. But before we get into that, I want to provide a very brief overview for those of you who may be less familiar with Ex Libris or the Ex Libris products. I want to provide just a little bit of background, which I think will help you put the rest of the conversation in context. Rutgers University leverages many of the Ex Libris solutions to support their users, and they'll be talking about some of those. So I'll just give you a little bit of background here. Generally speaking, our solutions do serve a variety of users: librarians, faculty, researchers, instructors, students. For libraries, this means that the library can leverage these solutions to help address the needs of your different users that you serve. And of course, this enables the library to play a very central role in the areas of teaching, learning, and research, and also provide users with a great experience when they're working with the library. So as I said, Rutgers University uses several of our products. They'll refer to, I think, at least some of them during the session today, but they will not be focusing on the products themselves. They'll be focusing more on the services that these products enable them to provide, the challenges that they're hoping to help their users overcome. But because they won't really be, explaining the products to you, I thought it would be helpful for you to have just a brief understanding of some of these. I won't cover them in any detail, but just so that the names are familiar to you. Alma is our unified library services platform. Rutgers uses Alma to manage print, electronic, and digital inventory. Rapido is our next generation resource sharing solution. Primo is the discovery layer that Rutgers is using. Esploro is the research information management solution. And Leganto is our course materials solution. So I did say it would be brief. I won't say any more about these products, but I also think it's important for you to know that they don't stand alone. They rest on what we refer to as the Ex Libris Higher Ed Cloud Platform. And this is the infrastructure that all the products sit on. So the platform itself is designed to be very open. It contains all of the underlying infrastructure around security and privacy, a shared data model, analytics, APIs, cloud operations. The products all leverage this underlying infrastructure to enable libraries to manage their collections and provide integrated services to the broader institution, again, especially in these areas of research, teaching and learning, and student success. So with that, just that brief introduction to Ex Libris, I'm now very happy to introduce you to our panelists today, starting with Mary Beth Weber. Mary Beth, would you like to introduce yourself and then pass it off to the rest of your colleagues?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mary Beth Weber. I'm head of Central Technical Services at Rutgers University Libraries. Our department we provide MARC and non-MARC metadata for print, electronic, digital materials, and we also do quality assurance, which is a nice word for database maintenance or cleanup. And I'm going to turn it over to Melissa.
Hello, my name is Melissa DeFino, and I work with Mary Beth in Central Technical Services. I'm the metadata librarian for special collections and audiovisual materials. And I've been at Rutgers for 18 years now. I also want to mention Mary Beth and I just co-authored a book together, which is titled Virtual Technical Services, a Handbook. And that's going to be published by Rowman and Littlefield in May. The focus of our book is much of what we're speaking about today, remote and hybrid work environments and technical services, both for the short term for emergency and disaster response, as well as the long term to meet the needs of an evolving user body and academic workforce. And should I pass it to Laura now?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Costello. I'm the Research and Instruction Services Coordinator at Rutgers, and I'm responsible for coordinating our synchronous and asynchronous virtual reference and our instructional technologies across our campuses. I'm also responsible for our implementation of Leganto and digital reserves. So I'll pass it off to Joseph.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joseph Diodato. I'm the Discovery Services Librarian. I've been with Rutgers for about 10 years now. During that time, I've managed a variety of library services that support research and discovery. At present, I'm primarily responsible for our discovery platform, Primo, which users use to search across our collections and access materials, and our institutional repository, which is powered by Esploro, which provides access to Rutgers created scholarship, open access to Rutgers created scholarship. I also supervise staff responsible for managing our electronic resources and have served on the implementation teams for many of the Ex Libris products used at Rutgers.
I'm going to let everyone know a little bit about Rutgers. In case you're not familiar with our university, we are the largest public research university in New Jersey. We have 3 main campus locations, Newark, Camden, and New Brunswick. New Brunswick actually spreads over a couple cities, New Brunswick and Piscataway. We have more than 66,000 students, more than 87,000 faculty, more than 750 million in research grants, and we are a member of the American Association of Universities and also the Big Ten Academic Alliance. Jesse, thanks. A little bit more about us. We have a $45 million operating budget. We have 300 library faculty and staff. Our collection consists of 5.7 million volumes. We also have more than 650 databases and indexes available to our users. Our website gets 8,500 daily visits, 450 daily circulation transactions. And in FY 2021, we got 37,000 user questions.
That's a lot of numbers to have to wrap your mouth around. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So with that kind of introduction into Rutgers, we're now ready to kick off the rest of our discussion. So as we all know, libraries serve and fulfill the needs of different types of users, university administrators, students, faculty, researchers. They all have different needs. And as you've probably guessed from their introductions, our panelists each work to serve different users in different ways. So my first question to you all is, what are some of the services or tools, in your areas of work? Who are your primary users and what are some of the challenges that they face? So Laura, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So as Mary Beth said in her introduction, Rutgers is very large. We have a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different types of users, and the library's mission is to serve everyone at Rutgers. Our primary users are the faculty, staff, and students at Rutgers. It's a big group of people and they have a lot of diverse needs. And one of the things we saw during COVID and the aftershocks is that we also have a diversity in how students and faculty are attending classes and the complexity that comes with operating in kind of a hybrid environment, which I'm sure many of our attendees can relate to. So one of the major challenges that our users have been facing and that we've been thinking about as a library is when we have in-person and remote users coexisting, how do we provide the same resources and opportunities to those students no matter how they access our services? So maybe one of my colleagues will elaborate on this a little bit, but one of the things we've been doing is using the HathiTrust Emergency Temporary Access Service in our system and kind of turning that off and on based on our university operating status. And that's been received in different ways by different users throughout time. It locks up a big portion of our print collections on campus, but it helps online accessibility and makes these titles available to users who can't come to campus for whatever reason. So we've received a lot of diversity and reactions on our virtual reference, some hate of this collection and some love, some hate turning into love, some love turning into hate. And throughout the pandemic, I think we've seen users as they've tried different modes of access and tried different services, feel different ways about it. And that's just one example. I think a lot of times we try to provide broad services, but they can't serve all users equally. So Rutgers, probably for the same reason, has a pretty complex technology landscape. One of the strategies that seems like at Rutgers is to kind of buy everything and see what floats to the top. So we have Zoom, WebEx, and Teams. We have Microsoft 365 and the G Suite. And one of the major challenges when we were first implementing Leganto is that we had major implementations of Blackboard, Canvas, and Sakai. And they were sometimes in use. Two LMSs were in use in the same department. So I think to that end, one of the things we think about really often as a library is, and I'm sure our users think about, is where to invest our time and resources so that we can reach as many people as possible.
Great, thank you. Joseph, how about from your perspective?
Sure. Discovery impacts all library users, but special attention is often reserved for our undergraduates. In addition to being the largest user group, they're also the least experienced. According to a somewhat now dated Library Journal survey, less than a third of first-year students are deemed prepared for college-level research. Many have never even visited a library before. So the goal of the library is to equip them with the services and the skills that they need to find, organize, and use information effectively. And those skills and services have changed significantly over the last 20 years as libraries have shifted from physical to electronic resources. Library search, is often a good example. Information about library collections was traditionally stored in one central place, the library catalog, whether that's the physical card catalog or the OPAC. There was kind of this one central place where you would go to search for materials. But as sources of information multiplied, library search became more fragmented. And instead of providing one central point of access, we started offering links to different silos of information. If you use the Wayback Machine and look at your library website for the last 20 years, you'll probably notice a similar trend, if it looks anything like ours, of evolving from this homepage with lots of different links to a catalog, to databases, e-journals, course reserves. Then it moved to a more tabbed search box with different searches for each of those things, to a more central single search. But in general, the story is that first year students simply didn't know where to begin. They would come to our website and the sheer amount of choices that they would see was kind of overwhelming, especially with unfamiliar resources. Furthermore, their expectations were increasingly shaped by their experiences on the web. So they were using services like Google and Amazon that search across a wide range of diverse content to deliver very fast, relevant results. In comparison, library search interfaces, started to look a little antiquated, a little confusing. So we were left with a situation where, a lot of our users, but especially our first year users, were relying on information sources that they knew to be of inferior quality, but were simply easier to find. So the challenge for libraries and for discovery services in particular became to offer an experience that had the simplicity of Google, which users expect, while providing kind of access to our digital and print collections, which users need. For graduate students and for faculty, there's still, that aspect of or that challenge, but the focus for them, by and large, tends to be less on finding information and more on organization and use. So I'll talk about later on some of the different services we provide in that area. But there's also, an important distinction to be made between what we consider internal and external discovery. Inward kind of involves making externally created resources, published books, articles, media, discoverable to our internal users. But there's also this flip side, which we rarely consider, which is about making internally created resources, dissertations, preprints, research data, special collections, discoverable to external users. So, as we go through and talk about some of these questions, I'll try to highlight kind of the difference between those two different approaches.
Great, thank you. Mary Beth, how about from your perspective?
Although our user community they're my ultimate users, my primary users as a behind the scenes person tend to be library employees, our subject specialists, our public services librarians, our fulfillment staff. And some of the challenges they face are getting robust metadata for digital projects and coordinating them with teaching faculty, making sure that we bring out the right elements to make them discoverable, that we do it in a timely fashion, that we do it using terms that are easily understood by people. Other challenges include getting donated materials cataloged as our collections, as our budgets, as our budgets have shrunk, donated materials have become more important. And as a big place, moving things from campus to campus and coordinating these workflows can be challenging. Fortunately, Alma provides us with some creative solutions for these materials. We're going to pilot a project to test a workflow, and I want to acknowledge my Rutgers colleague, Chris Sturbach, in helping to make this possible.
Great, thank you. And then Melissa?
Sure. So my work is focused on specialized materials, both special collections and also audiovisual. So on one side of that, my eventual users are archivists, bibliographers, and researchers that are using primary source material. But on the other side, I have students and teaching faculty who are using streaming videos, for example, in their coursework. those are two very different sets of users with very different research needs. Streaming media became particularly important when we moved to remote and then hybrid environments. But what we saw was that even the on-site classes found a preference for streaming, just as a more updated technology. So in many cases, even if we had a DVD available, they were still requesting a streaming version of that DVD. In special collections, the pandemic highlighted the need to expedite digitization to make our resources available online. And that's where we're focusing now in that area.
Great, thank you. I think it's fair to say that libraries are always looking for ways to increase their value and better serve their users. You've all talked a bit about that already. One way to do that, of course, is to help alleviate some of these challenges. So with that, what are some of the services or tools that your library provides to your users? You've all talked about this a little bit already, but maybe you can go into this a little bit more. And also, how do they address some of those challenges that you've mentioned? So for this one, we'll start with you, Joseph.
Sure. So like I mentioned, the primary challenge for discovery is to help users find, organize, and use information. That approach varies according to user needs. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. And we offer a variety of different products from different vendors to kind of meet those challenges. So in terms of content discovery, obviously we provide access to Primo, which, like I said, allows users to search across all of our, or most of our collections to find materials relevant to their needs, regardless of format, provider, or platform. It simplifies the search process quite a bit, and most users tend to find it helpful. For our more specialized users, for graduate students and faculty, we still maintain our index and databases list, organized by subject, or even they can find resources by resource type. We made quite a lot of improvements to that this past year to help people find things a little bit more easily. We also offer access to Browsine, which is a current awareness service and and a way to browse journals, scholarly journals. It's more targeted towards our faculty, and our grad students. They can follow journals in their field, add them to their bookshelf, receive table of contents alerts anytime a new issue is published, just to keep current with their research and their discipline. And then, of course, we also offer our research guides, subject and course-based pathfinders, developed by librarians that help place all of these different services in the context of your discipline, or even your class. In terms of for our upper level users, we also offer tools to help support research management. So things like RefWorks and EndNote that help people save references and full text documents, organize, highlight, and annotate things, generate citations, and collaborate and share projects with other users. We have quite a lot of users for both those products. And then in terms of scholarly communication, there's this component, obviously, like I mentioned, like there's also people wanting to make their resources, things that they create, discoverable, especially our faculty. So we have our institutional repository, which promotes our faculty scholarship and offers our researcher profiles. Like I said, that's powered by Esploro. For promoting student research, we use Alma-D to promote, to provide access to capstone papers, posters, and presentations, things like that. For open access publishing, we offer things like press books for those who want to publish their own textbooks, or open journal systems. We host quite a few different journals at the university, and have something called the Open Access Textbook Initiative, which is an incentive program that awards grants to faculty interested in replacing their existing course materials with open educational resources. And then also things like data management services, helping people develop data management plans using DMP tool, identifying data repositories for hosting their data, et cetera. But it's important to note that it's not just about selecting the right product for all these different needs, but ensuring that it's meeting the needs of your local users. So whenever possible, even after we purchase something, we try to make configuration and customization decisions that are user-centered and data-driven, using things like surveys, usability testing, search log analysis, to kind of tweak and refine these tools and make sure that they meet the needs of our users. So just to offer a quick case study, I'll talk about some things that we've done with Primo. Early on, we did lots of user testing, with all different users from different campuses, especially our undergrads. And we found, we modified Primo to do things that we thought better fit with what we were seeing from researcher needs and behavior. So for example, we know that undergrads often come with broad, unfocused research questions. They tend to prefer simple keyword searches. They rarely use Boolean or advanced search techniques or modify default search options. So some of the things that we did was offer a single search scope, no options to choose or search different formats. One blended search scope to search across everything, casting the widest possible net. No pre-search filters, allowing users to refine things in post after they've done their initial search. Like several published studies, we found that our users tend to prioritize things like convenience over quality. They have trouble distinguishing formats. They rarely look beyond the first page of results. They have difficulty recovering from unsuccessful searches. So we've done things like make sure that the default search results are filtered by availability, only show the stuff that we have access to, and then offer the option to expand. Implement direct linking, making it easier to go from search result to full text with the minimal number of clicks. Customizing our resource type icons to make it clear what kind of resource you're looking at right from the search results. Using search suggestions, creating a custom tile on the bottom of search results, that says something like, can't find what you're looking for, try this, and giving some options there. Integrating an error reporting form so that people can report problems that they see, as they're searching. Then we'll look at our search logs and figure out, what are people typing in? How are they using the product? One thing we found was that a lot of our users will type in database names into Primo in the hopes of, finding something that they know, like JSTOR or PubMed or something like that. So we took that as, an indication that we needed to use Primo's resource recommender. And we made it so that anytime someone types in a database name, they'll immediately get a direct link to that database right at the top of their search results. We looked at our analytics to find out how people were using facets or the send to actions that appear on the item record. And we would use those statistics to remove unused options to reduce clutter, or to order options by frequency of use. Also, we're open to informal feedback. We monitor that error reporting form, the questions that we get from our users all the time, and we'll make adjustments. So we found that users were having difficulty understanding the coverage for journals. So when Ex Libris recently implemented an enhancement that allows you to put your summary coverage right into the brief results, we jumped on that and we immediately implemented that. So it's easier to tell, once you find a journal, what the library actually provides access to. So lots of different minor changes that iteratively over time improve the product and make sure that it's serving user needs. So those are some of the things that we do. Sorry.
No, it's great to hear how focused you are on the users and making these fixes really based on what as opposed to just guessing about these things. It's really interesting. Laura, how about from your perspective?
Sure. In my area, one of the main services we offer is virtual reference. And our flagship service is a virtual reference chat that runs every day from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. It's staffed exclusively with Rutgers librarians, and the service quality is very high. We can accommodate all different types of questions, and we get around 70 to 85% reference questions through this channel. And behind that, we have an asynchronous ticketing system. Both of those run on SpringShare's Live Answers. We also have consultations through LibCal appointments. And like Joseph talked about with Primo, the entry point for our virtual reference service is very broad. We get a lot of questions. We get a huge diversity of questions, and keeping it broad helps us promote it and ensure that students don't have to kind of select what they need based on a lot of different reference services. There's just really one channel for them when chat is on. But on the back end, because we do that, it's more complex. The librarians have to be ready to refer a huge variety of questions. And that's part of the reason that we staff it at such a high level. We're also doing a similar simple and broad approach with Leganto. When the pandemic started, we were offering a very basic service for all the different LMSs that we were serving. And the reserve staff on our side were kind of manually making those connections between reading lists and the courses, which was very labor intensive, but it allowed us to cater to all of these different technology platforms. And then as the university has kind of moved toward Canvas, which they have, we've been able to make that service more simplified and more automatic. So that's been a good boon for us.
Great, thank you. Melissa?
Thanks. So as Laura and Joseph mentioned, because Rutgers is such a large institution, it's spread across so many different locations, the libraries also have a rather complex internal structure. And the process of acquiring and making a single streaming video, for example, available to our users could potentially involve a dozen individuals working across 3 or 4 different departments just in the libraries. As Laura mentioned, to make this easier, we use a Spring Share ticketing system to communicate across departments, from the point of acquisition to digitization if necessary, to resource description to discovery. And for my part and Mary Beth's in resource description, we use MarcEdit, OCLC Connection, and Alma to provide bibliographic description. The good thing about these products is they're all cloud-based. So this work can be done anywhere at any time, which helps when we're working on tight deadlines. For special collections, the process is similar. Working remotely with the tools that we have, we didn't see any interruption in work when we moved to remote. But in this process, we also found that we are able to provide resource description for more materials in a more expedited manner. So we no longer have to have each item in hand. We no longer have to wait for the material to arrive on site to be described. We can catalog from the point of order so that as soon as the item arrives on site, it's ready to be processed and delivered straight to our users.
Great. Mary Beth, anything to add?
Yes, I was also going to say something about the queue, but that Liv answers queues, but I'm going to talk a little bit about Alma Digital. I was involved in some projects in the spring, and I have to say how easy it was to train project participants and to make their work available quickly. The fact that Alma Digital is integrated into Alma makes it easy to learn since it's not another product. It's just additional permissions, and we could work very collaboratively. Following up on what Melissa said, because it was cloud-based, we could look at each other's work and edit it in real time and provide feedback, and it worked very smoothly. We also have an in-house product that we've used for many years, and that's not to say this, it's not a good product, but using Alma Digital for digital projects was so much easier and quicker. And then I just want to follow up on what people have said about the queue, the Live Answers queues. Weeding projects or database errors that affect display or discovery, those are conveyed to us through those queues. There's a cataloging queue, we have one for electronic resources, there's the implementation team one. We do sometimes get questions from the public about how things are cataloged, or they might identify an error. And the great part about using a queue is that it streamlines the process, it allows us to track what kinds of questions we get and from whom, and it also allows us to standardize things. Before we had one, we'd have people asking different people to do things. You'd have work going on that you didn't know about it. Now we have a way of tracking who wants what, how quickly we've answered it, and who should be involved in it.
Great, thank you. It's clear from the 4 of you, and I know that you're representing a much larger group of people at Rutgers. You are using a lot of tools, so that is very clear from your answers. Some of them are Ex Libris tools, some of them are not from Ex Libris, but for the ones that you are getting through Ex Libris, how does the unified approach that I talked about in the very beginning impact either your library work or your users? So Mary Beth, why don't we start with you for this one?
Okay, the unified approach, I'm getting tongue-tied this afternoon, between Alma and Primo is great. It's so difficult if you have a suite of different types of products and they don't all talk to each other. We've had that before with acquisition systems or other types of things. One thing, for example, is with Alma, catalogers can use the view and discovery option to see how records will display in Primo. What you look at in MARC is very different from what your public sees. And by the same token, Primo has a link to Alma source records. So when somebody submits a ticket or has a question, I can click at it and see exactly what record is causing issues. What else? And as Melissa had said before, since Alma's cloud-based, anyone in my department can use it from anywhere. With our previous system, it had to be installed on your PC or your home computer. It took up a lot of storage space, and you also needed to access the VPN to get into it. And it was clunky, and it took up a lot of storage space and time. And the unified approach with all the products that are designed to work with each other is much easier to use.
Laura, anything to add?
Sure. For Leganto, one of the things that I particularly like is that it provides a couple levels of unified service. It's integrated with Primo on the user side, so students get a familiar interface, and when they're working in Leganto, it helps them work in Primo and vice versa. They're not kind of starting from scratch with a new tool. And then on the library side, it's integrated with Alma's course reserve, so instructors and reserve staff can work collaboratively together. And because of this, it was a lot easier for us to build on our existing workflows when we moved to fully virtual reserves.
Great, thank you. Joseph, anything from your perspective to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was said, but yeah, I mean, the integration with Primo and Alma is obviously big, and the ability to be able to see holdings and and our information in real time, as it gets worked on in Alma. The integration with Leganto, being able to add things to the reading list right from Primo. Also, I would say the integration with Alma and Esploro, being able to load our researchers, as an extension of our Alma user records, publishing things to Primo. Biggest advantage, of course, is harvesting metadata from CDI. So using Esploro, you can smart harvest data from the Central Discovery Index for publications authored by your researchers and create records that way, instead of having them manually entered by the researcher. So things like that. Also external integrations between our Ex Libris products and other university systems using the APIs. So integrations with our student information systems, learning management systems, authentication, etc. Also, I would also add that having a central place of support is also huge. So if we had different products for all this, we open up so many support cases a day that the idea of actually managing those for different vendors would be unfathomable. So just having them all go to the support center and be able to view your tickets and update them, that's also helps, I think, a lot with our workflows.
That's great to hear. Switching gears here, obviously the COVID pandemic has presented many challenges for libraries, but it's also created opportunities to really think about what the library should be doing, look for opportunities to do things differently than before, maybe stop doing certain things, add additional services. So in what ways has your library adapted to ensure that you are meeting the needs of your users and the goals of the library or the institution? Laura, we'll start with you this time.
Sorry, I was on mute. We were lucky that we had a good base of digital services when the pandemic hit. Our chat service was really foundational, and we were really able to quickly muster additional staffing so we could deploy. We have a pop-up widget more quickly to reach more users. We also had Leganto already in place to host digital reserves, though we were still pretty firmly physical when the pandemic hit. We had to do a lot of conversion of both materials and workflows in short order when we closed our doors temporarily. So we have a lot of legacy reserves users from before the pandemic, before we started with Leganto, faculty and students both, and they still really think of course reserves as physical. The pandemic was really a challenge and an opportunity to change the way we offered reserves, and we wanted to do it in a way that kept those existing users in the fold. So Leganto supports a greater variety of materials for reserve. It's allowed us to expand kind of our definition of what it means to be on course reserve, and expand to new user groups and disciplines who work mostly electronically, like our law libraries and our health sciences libraries. And one of the great things is that we can continue to support reserves with our reserves staff in the way that we always have. But we have more flexibility to work with instructors if they want to be a part of that process, if they want to create their own reading lists, if they want to add materials that we wouldn't think of as things that would ordinarily be on reserves when we were in a physical mode. And we've been able to kind of bring new users and new types of materials into the fold without changing the foundational workflow for our existing users, which has been really valuable.
Great, thank you. Joseph, how about from your perspective here?
I would say probably the biggest adaptation during the pandemic was just expanding access to electronic content. Just making sure that we had as much electronic content available as possible. So there was obviously a greater investment by the libraries in electronic resources, just more remote learning. Over, I think, 20,000 new ebooks were added over the course of the pandemic. We also used that opportunity to implement a large-scale DDA program, which added 70,000 titles to our collection, just in the DDA pool. And then eventually, I think 10,000 of those have been purchased to date. Laura mentioned HathiTrust Emergency Temporary Access Service. That was obviously a huge benefit. HathiTrust provided temporary online access to digital versions of print titles that would have otherwise been inaccessible due to library closures. That added an additional 700,000 volumes of electronic content to our collection. We also created, and a lot of the credit for these things go to our e-resources librarian who worked on this stuff. But creating an expedited workflow for requesting and activating trials and free resources that were being offered during the pandemic. We added quite a few databases to our collection. There was a specific growth in the humanities, so we added a lot of classical texts, historical newspapers, primary source collections to make sure that our arts and humanities departments were supported. Yeah, and then I would just say it's not just about acquiring new e-content, but also finding ways to get the most out of our print, like Laura mentioned, converting print reserves to electronic, introducing book chapters to our DocDel service, and then even the HathiTrust accessible text request service, which allows anyone with vision impairments or blind users to request accessible digital copies of print materials.
Great, thank you. Melissa, how about from your perspective here?
Sure. So when we first pivoted to remote in 2020 in Central Technical Services, we thought it would be temporary. And so we started from a place where we were thinking that we'd spend that time cleaning up our data and updating our department website, things that we hadn't been able to get to until then. But as that time began to stretch out, we had to find ways to continue the work we had done pre-pandemic, but in a safe, remote, and later hybrid environment. And this is where we had to get innovative. So in a lot of ways, we were fortunate that this situation happened in 2020, because what would we have done in 2010, in 2000, in 1990? But in 2020, most of the work we were doing on site before the pandemic was only being done on site out of a sense of tradition and expectation. We did work at work just because that's the way it had always been done before. But the products we were using at work were all internet and cloud-based. So more and more of the resources we were describing as well were digital or electronic and not physical. But even the physical materials we were describing existed in some form online. So we were already working in the cloud, even if our physical bodies were on campus. But even with that, I don't think any of us realized it. We didn't think about it that way. if someone had asked me in 2019 if I could catalog the special collections book from home without actually holding the book in my hand, I probably would have laughed. But in 2020, out of necessity, I was suddenly realizing, I already have all the information I need about this book from the vendor's description, from other places that have digitized it. And the truth is, even in 2019, I depended on that information for resource description, often more than I depended on the physical book itself, especially for something like special collections or media, where what you're working with is so unique that the item itself doesn't really tell you the whole story of the item. You need to do a little research, which is all going to be online research. So this was an aha moment for us in resource description, because we pretty quickly realized that we were going to be able to continue doing everything we had done before without interruption. And then once we started doing it, we realized we could actually move through these things much more quickly than we had done before.
It's a really interesting perspective and very well put. I don't know if you could see me sort of chuckling as you were talking. Mary Beth, anything else to add to this?
I truly believe that our users have received the same level of service, if not better, during this time. As Melissa mentioned, we've adjusted our workflows to enable some work to be done remotely and maintain the same level of quality. And since there's an emphasis on e-preferred digital and streaming, and we get far fewer materials that need to be in hand to catalog, our catalogers can catalog materials from anywhere as long as they have the tools. We also have flexible scheduling, and so our staff are not on site 5 days a week as they had been in the past. Right now with Omicron, they're coming in on an as needed basis. If we do have priority print materials, for example, that need to be handled to get end processing, they all have work that they can do on short notice at home. For example, when Hurricane Ida was coming, or if a snowstorm is coming, they know that they can automatically switch that. And the funny part is, when I told them originally that they'd be working at home and we thought it'd be short term, some of them were very reluctant and said, I want to come here. Well, those same people now ask, do I have to be there? I have stuff I can do at home. And they're still doing the same level of work and doing a great job. And for some of them, that was a big stretch, because they're people who are not really sophisticated with technology or like to change. And the fact that they have adapted really says a lot.
Great, thank you. This is, I think we all know now that change is constant. We are always changing, will always be changing, especially over the last couple of years and probably the next few years, but this is also nothing new. Looking forward, what are some of the new approaches or services that you or your library are planning to pursue to increase your library value and better serve your institution and your users? And before I call on each of you, I'll say let's keep these answers a little shorter. I do want to make sure that we have time for some of the things in the Q&A. So for those of you who may have questions from the audience, now's a good time to put those in the Q&A if you haven't already. But for this last question, Mary Beth, we'll start with you.
I'm just going to quickly talk about the donated gifts, because we are planning something that's completely different, and we'll be able to do it thanks to Alma. It'll mean less handling the materials, less shifting them around, getting them done more quickly. And if it's successful, it'll mean these materials will be made much more quickly and they won't be sitting in backlogs.
Great, thank you. Melissa?
Sure. So we're living right now in a time that's very challenging and frustrating and sad. But I also have seen it all along as simultaneously a hopeful time, because we have the opportunity to change and make things better than they were before. So when we let go of working a certain way just because it's the way we've always done it, we can focus instead on work that's meaningful and impactful. So for example, I care a lot less these days about working to impress other catalogers, sorry, Mary Beth, and a lot more about providing access and service for our students and researchers. But our students and researchers are changing too. We've found that the traditional college student who is 18 to 22 years old and lives on campus and is supported financially by their parents and only ever studies in the library and only has access to the computers we provide in computer labs, they're being replaced by students who have real life responsibilities and experiences and lives beyond campus. I'm thinking another time we saw this change in academics was right after World War II, when the student body changed drastically. And this time historically is very similar to that. That time saw a vast change to colleges and universities, and I think we're going to see the same thing now. But there are a few unifying things that we're all facing. One is that we're all living in this hybrid world together. We're not talking about the future anymore. This is just our present reality. When you think about it, even experiences that occur in physical spaces begin in online spaces. So before our users have walked through our doors, they've already accessed our website, looked up a resource in Primo, chatted with a reference librarian, or emailed us. Whether or not we realize it, we're no longer living in a world that is strictly on-site and physical. And as those technologies improve, the physical is going to get smaller and the online is frankly going to take a more prominent role in our lives. We're in a transition period now between those two worlds. The other thing that's bringing us all together now is that we all have more to do and less time to do it, which is probably appropriate as our clock is winding down for this session. But the lower we are in the socioeconomic scale, the more fiercely we feel this. And I think higher ed is coming to terms with that reality. We're seeing that colleges and universities like Rutgers that have been more flexible in the past 2 years are enjoying relative success now. And the institutions that remained inflexible, that insisted on continuing to do things the way they'd been done for decades, they're facing economic trouble. So as academic librarians, the more that we can provide online to meet the changing needs of our users, the more we can meet our users in these hybrid spaces where they're already existing, and the better service we can provide.
As I said, thank you. Laura?
Just to build really quickly on what Melissa said, it was very eloquent. But I think one of the things that I'm excited about in terms of digital work is working with other campuses on our university and kind of being able to collaborate better on projects. Distance doesn't really divide us anymore. There are more opportunities for us to collaborate, and there's also more opportunities to partner with other colleges and universities. So that's something that's exciting for me.
And Joseph?
Just a few things first. I think that we need to rethink kind of our entire approach to discovery, acknowledging, kind of as Melissa said, that discovery doesn't, happen often in the library, not just the physical library, but even the virtual one. Google remains the starting point for most student research. And so I think we need to offer tools and services that help users get from kind of the open web to the library collections, whether they be browser plugins like LibKey, Lean Library, and those things, or just in general rethinking the centrality of the discovery layer, knowing that people aren't necessarily going to come to maybe Primo or to the library website, and think about ways of using linked data to ensure that library resources are discoverable on the open web. Also, I would say that discovery is not helpful without access. So we've noticed that users have trouble obtaining items that don't directly have links to full text, especially things that aren't locally available. So we've been, in the process of implementing Rapido in the hopes of simplifying kind of the request process and making it easier for people to not only request materials, but also get information about delivery time, know if it's going to come in time for their assignment, be able to manage those requests centrally through their account in Primo. And lastly, I would say the libraries have been, successful in expanding access to remote access to things like books, journals, and media. But one segment of our collection that remains relatively disadvantaged in the remote environment is our special collections. And we need to think about ways of making those more available through digitization, but it's also, again, not just digitizing, but also it's a discovery problem. Making sure that these materials are not just more widely available, but allowing them to be discovered and interpreted alongside related materials available from elsewhere. This could be a really good and exciting opportunity for special collections, and putting those resources in dialogue with other institutions and kind of participating in things like, DPLA, or just getting them indexed in Google or linking them into Wikipedia entries, but getting them out there so that people can actually see them and use them.
Great, thank you. And just thank you again to all of you for being so open and willing to share your stories with us. We do have some time now for Q&A from our audience. I'll warn all of you that there are a lot of questions in here, and I'm very sure we won't get to all of them. There's contact information on the screen here for all of our panelists. If we don't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us with your questions or comments, or if you just want to share how things are going for you. But with the time we have left, I'll ask a few questions. This is one I'm interested in. When you look at the usage of these tools, do you go by the number of uses or the percentage of the campus population to judge if enough people use it to justify offering it? I think for our questions, I'll let each of you decide if you want to answer it, and maybe others can chime in.
I think I marked this question, so I can go first on this. I think that we have a group of library users, and we'll always, because of the diversity and size of our institution, have library non-users. So I don't think that we use a proportion of the number of users that we could potentially have to evaluate services. But we do use information about how many people have used these services in the past, and seeing growth is really important to us. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to jump in and say anything else about that.
All right. Here's another one. This is for you, Joseph. Would you have the stat handy for the statistic that less than a third of entering students are prepared for college level research?
Yeah, I actually ended up pasting a link in the in response to another question, but it was a 2017 survey from Library Journal. I can paste it in the box again. I messed up by saying answering live, and then I.
Okay.
But I'll paste it in the chat.
We're learning how this Q&A queue here works.
Yeah.
Okay, Melissa, this one is for you. How do you catalog without having the item, especially if there isn't a good record for it? And did the quality suffer?
Surprisingly, no. And I wouldn't have believed me either before I was doing it. But as I was saying, I was depending on a lot of external research for what I catalog, even when we were all on site and I had access to the materials right in front of me. Because special collections is a different animal. You're not always going to get everything you need to know about the object from the object itself. There's a lot of external research that goes on in order to describe it. So for my work anyway, it was really eye-opening that I could provide resource description for this item without having the item in hand. And the same was true for media, because in a lot of ways, even though they are so different, they're similar in their specialness in the amount of research that has to go into it externally to the item itself.
All right. Okay, I think we have time for one more question here. How about what percentage of your students access the library physically versus virtually? How do you increase the presence of the library? I find many students don't even know about many of the library services. I don't have anyone to call on. Anyone who wants to take this one?
I can just jump in with a strategy that we've been using for virtual reference, which is the proactive pop-up chat. And that's been really fruitful for us in introducing what we think of as new users to the service. Instead of waiting for a student to initiate a chat with us, we kind of pop up a little bubble to invite them to chat with us. And that has brought, I think, a lot of new users into the fold for virtual reference.
In terms of statistics of how many access physically versus virtually, I don't think I have it on hand, but I mean, obviously we get more virtual than physical visitors. And then, yeah, in terms of increasing the presence, I would say, just trying to be where our students are using, our resources. So in the LMS systems, or, elsewhere on the university's website, but also just we rely really on our liaisons too, on our subject liaisons to work with their departments and make sure that their users know about our services and how to access them.
All right, thank you. I'll say one more thank you to all of our panelists today for speaking and for answering these questions and sharing their story. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining today. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your questions and your feedback through the Q&A. I think this is everything we have time for. So I believe we'll just wrap up here. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thanks, Jessie. Thanks so much to our presenters for taking the time to present today, and thanks to our attendees for your questions and your comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, give you a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey. We'd really appreciate it. There's one from Choice and also one from ProQuest Ex Libris in the chat. Thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something from the session, and we hope to see you in the future on another webinar.